URL parameters listener contains the browser storage feature, which allows us to capture any information from our data layer activity and actually store it in the user's browser. We can use this to persist information across either page views, sessions, or just across a certain amount of time so that we can use that information in our measurement and tracking strategies. Now, if you haven't, take a look at the video under custom data layer values, which will appear here soon. And we begin a use case where we are identifying test users or individuals from our team, and we may want to filter those individuals out of our measurement strategy. And at the end of that, we identify that this piece of information that we're actually pushing into the data layer is something that we may want to store in the browser so that it'll actually persist over time from our measurement. Now, this is just one use case for how we can use browser storage, but we're going to run with it and pick that up because it'll give you a clear understanding of how this feature can be used. And then you can start to think about other ways you can apply that. So definitely watch that custom data layer values video. Now, the first step to browser storage is to actually identify the users, is to identify the actual key or the cookie that you want to store the information inside of in the browser. So here we've already created one. It's called test user. And we've set it as a session storage key, which means once the user's session actually ends, the information is going to be cleared. Now, if you wanted to, you could actually, let's say you were using this for your internal team and you wanted to filter out their activity from your measurement and your analytics. You may just want that to persist a little bit longer. And that way, just kind of by default, you're making it a little stickier, meaning it's not going to disappear so quickly. And so the users, that information that's going to exclude them from analytics is probably going to be a little bit more reliable. So we've created this variable now called test user, and I've set it as a local storage key, and I'm going to save it. Now, again, it's important to define your browser storage variables first, because when we write rules to actually push information in or store information into the browser from the data layer, we need a variable to save it in. So now we're going to jump back to features. And of course, I already have browser storage turned on, but when you turn this on, this menu item over here is going to appear. It's very important, this browser storage item. And when I navigate here, I'm going to create a rule. And because I just changed my storage key to local storage instead of session storage, I'm going to click on local storage. I'm going to create a rule that's going to save something in local storage. So I'm going to save test user identification. And just as a quick summary, what we did in the custom variable or the custom values feature in that other video that I referenced is we're telling our internal team that when they visit the site, we want them to put a URL parameter on their URL to help identify them as a test user or as kind of an internal user, and we want to filter them out of our analytics. We don't want them to be included at all. Well, it's easy enough to push that into the data layer and register it in Google Tag Manager and use that, but what we really want is to have that persist over time. So then in all of our future data layer activity, we can resurface that information and we can decide to exclude that user. So back to our browser storage, we've named our rule and now we need to write a condition. Now a condition is basically whenever something occurs in our data layer that we want to match, we're going to do something in our browser storage. So in this case, what we care about is that custom variable that we created in the other video. And it's this one called test user. So what we did there is we wrote a rule, a pretty advanced rule that says like, hey, if any of these parameters exist with any of these values, then we're going to push a single centralized value into the data layer called test user. And we want this to say yes. Now, in this case, anytime this variable exists with any value, I'm going to just go ahead and store it in the browser. That's kind of the easiest way to do it. We could say, hey, if this contains the value yes, then that's fine. But in this case, again, we're just going to store it in the browser anytime it exists. And let me just jump to my data layer activity to make sure that this is super clear. So here we have a data layer push from the URL parameters listener. It's being pushed into the data layer. And we have this custom value. The value is yes, and it's being pushed into this custom variable called test user. And this is what we identified in that previous video and what we created. And what I'm doing now here is I'm saying, hey, when this test user variable exists in the data layer with any value, just like it does right now, we're going to go ahead and store that value, or we're going to store something in the browser. So I'm going to save my condition, and I'm going to go to set a value, and I'm going to select a key, one of my local storage keys, test user. And here's the cool thing. We're going to push a value into this, but we can push whatever we want. We could push the timestamp of the user, the full JavaScript timestamp, or we could push the ISO timestamp. And then we could actually, maybe we separate it with a pipe and we push something else in there like, hi, my name is, it's like this hello, just an example, like a hello world. But the point is we can do anything we want once this condition is matched based on the data layer, including just getting the actual value from the data layer itself. So we can get the value from the data layer itself, which in this case is most likely going to be yes, although we did write a rule that would return no in certain situations. That's fine. We can, you could kind of slice and dice this so many different ways. In this case, we're just going to push the value directly in here, and we're going to save the rule. And actually, sorry, we have to define this. So we have to tell what behavior we want as far as like keeping information that already exists inside that local storage key, or overwriting it, or not overwriting it. So in this case, we're going to overwrite the existing value because we always want the latest. And we're going to publish this. So we're going to say browser storage or test user. Okay, so now this is live. And we're going to go over here and we're going to do a hard refresh. And we have one of our test parameters in here. And it's loading a little slow just because I cleared my cache there. But you can see here we have our URL custom value is yes. And so what we would expect is that now we have a local storage key called test user, and we do. It's right here with the value yes. Now, you might ask yourself, okay, so now what do I do with this in this situation? Well, there's so much that you could do with this, because in the future, in any sort of future data layer event, we could actually take this information and resurface it into the data layer. We could push it into hidden fields in a form. So we could easily identify any of our test form submissions and kind of get rid of them in our CRM, for example. And we could do that a number of different ways. But in this case, the intention was to allow this test information to persist so that in future data layer activity, we can just identify this. Now, Google Tag Manager does allow you to read cookies from GTM directly. And so that would be one argument for maybe saving this as a cookie. I'm not a huge fan of cookies for various reasons. But that would allow you to literally actually, for example, you could, in Google Tag Manager, you could limit your main like page view event activities. You could limit them and exclude and not fire any tags at all if this, if you have a cookie with this value. The other thing you could do is you could resurface this back into the data layer into a future data layer event. And what that would look like is, let's just, I'm trying to think of a good example here that is already enabled. Let's take a look at HubSpot Forms here. And let's write a rule in HubSpot Forms where we're going to actually extract information from the browser storage. So what we're going to do here is anytime a HubSpot form is submitted, or we could even do it, anytime the HubSpot form loads. Oops, I have to set this on true. Then we could actually get a browser variable now. So we could say, hey, let's put a let's identify this person as a test user also during this event. So here I'm going to get my browser storage. I'm going to get my local storage called test user. And this is going to be really cool, actually, as a quick example here. So I'm going to publish this. I'm going to say identify test users during form submissions. Okay, so let's see if this unplanned test is going to work. I turned it on for form loads as well because it'll make it easy. So here we have a form loaded event, and check this out. We have form custom value test user equals yes. So now what happens is if I fill out this form, I think it'll probably block me if I put a test email in here. It might block me because Spot is that way sometimes. We have a form submitted event. So now if we if we were firing a conversion based on HS form submitted, we could actually exclude this one because now we know this is a test user. Well, this test user information literally just came from my browser storage right here. And it was pushed back into the data layer. So you can see how these things can kind of overlap, where we can kind of build a very comprehensive way of identifying test users, and then we can allow that to persist, and we can either make that persistence from the browser storage directly available to Google Tag Manager using a cookie, or we could actually just resurface it during future data layer activity. So there's so much you can do with browser storage. I hope you jump into this feature. Let us know some of the cool things that you build. And don't forget to jump back and watch that custom data layer values video so that all of this makes perfect sense.